Thank you all for tuning in to my live, and I'm going to actually try a call-in show today. So thank everybody for tuning in. As you know, we just received from the Supreme Court that affirmative action in higher education is now banned when considering race in admissions. And so we're just going to talk about what does this mean for HBCUs and what can we do to basically prepare for the influx of students that will be now attending HBCUs. It looks like we are going back to the 80s and 90s regarding enrollment. And in a lot of schools in America at the university level, the amount of African Americans or Black Americans, minorities, is low anyway. We've already discussed that in Colorado. The amount of Black people there is less than 2 to 3%. So that means officially, more than likely, those numbers will dwindle even further, and it'll be more so based off of, are you a student athlete? That's going to be your ticket to go to a lot of these predominantly white institutions. So moving forward, what's done is done. It's the law of the land, the Supreme Court. It's the highest. You can't go and say, hey, let's overturn this. It is what it is. So now we need to focus on, what do HBCUs do in response to this? So I wanted to quickly go over HBCU enrollment, which we've seen a drastic increase in several different universities. And then we need to talk about, where do we go from here? And what are some ways that we can group think on helping our universities, whether it's filing lawsuits, supporting schools such as FAMU that have already filed lawsuits to get more funding, or applying to be a part of the HBCU Capital Finance Program. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the enrollment change since 2019 so we can look at the increases. And also, let's talk about how some of our infrastructure at several HBCUs is pressured right now. In 2023, there are, hello, Brother Bakari, hello, Mr. Carey. There are several HBCUs that are struggling to find housing because of this influx of student saying, I want to go to an HBCU. So if we don't have the infrastructure to provide for students now, or we are struggling to provide for students with regard to sufficient housing, what can we do moving forward to increase those numbers? So the biggest HBCU, of course, is North Carolina A&T, and they've seen huge enrollment trends. So this is the one that I wanted to look at. North Carolina A&T, as of 2021, and these are 2021 head counts. Even since 2021, there's been significant increase even since then. So North Carolina A&T, 13,322, up 6%. Howard was up 28% since 2019. Prairie View A&M was up 5%. Morgan State University was up 9%. I know that this particular document, it only has 2001, and Tennessee State University, it says that it's almost unchanged. But from 2021 up until 2023, they saw significant growth. Jackson State as well. They have probably about 8,500 students as of like 2022, 2023. Southern University is up 4% in 2021. Alabama State, Bowie, excuse me, Clark Atlanta had a 3% increase. Winston-Salem State was up. Norfolk State, it looks like they were down a little bit. So basically, the overall premise is that there's been an increase in our enrollment. So now we have to look at what are some ways that we are going to be able to, in my mind, I'm guessing, make sure that we have the infrastructure to be able to provide for these students. This is definitely, I feel like it's a huge setback for education, just because they're attacking education on all fronts. But I would say that for HBCUs, this is an opportunity to have a renaissance. We just have to have the means, and we have to be ready. And we also have to attack from a legal standpoint in acquiring, whether it's by lawsuit, we have to acquire the funds to be able to provide this infrastructure. So one of the programs that they have available at the federal level is called the HBCU Capital Financing Program. And why this program is so important, basically they utilize bonds, and it gives HBCUs the opportunity to get low-cost loans, specifically for repairing, renovating, construction of classrooms, libraries, dormitories. And I did call the HBCU Capital Financing Executive Director today. They are still in business, so this is a program that's ongoing. I wanted to quickly go over the types of projects that are available for the capital financing program and how it can be used as a way for projects to be funded. Now, of course, you do have to have the engineering. So it's almost like, I guess he said, it's kind of like buying a house as far as what has to be done. But you do need an engineering firm, or you need to know how much the project is going to cost, what it is that you need. So it's not just, hey, we need a $100 million loan. You do have to go through a process in order to acquire these funds. But this, to me, it seems like it's the quickest way for certain HBCUs to be able to get that funding needed. So the loan proceeds of the HBCU Capital Financing Program can be used for repair, renovation, or in exceptional circumstances, the construction or acquisition of any classroom facility, library, dormitory, dining facilities, or other facility customarily used by colleges and universities for research purposes or for housing students, faculty, and staff. My main focus for today, of course, would be housing, because if we're going to talk about what it is exactly HBCUs would need in order to be able to take on the influx, you're going to have the correct type of infrastructure. You're going to have dorms. I know TSU just recently had a settlement with the state of Tennessee, but the problem with their settlement is that they put restrictions on what they can use the money for. And one of the restrictions that they had was you cannot use it to build any new buildings. housing was a big issue for Tennessee State University. So that's, I don't know exactly who the lawyers were, but it was probably one of those things like, okay, we'll settle, but you can't build any new buildings. And they probably were tired of drawing it out, and they said, okay, let's just settle. But I feel like that right there is going to be at their detriment, because one of the things that they needed was to be able to acquire the ability to build new buildings. Okay, and so then what else is on here? I wanted to take a look at one of the most important parts of the HBCU Capital Finance Program, but then unfortunately for Jackson State, Alcorn Valley, and North Carolina HBCUs, we're not able to participate in the capital financing program because there is state legislation that basically prohibits the schools from being able to participate by getting federal bonds. A lot of these state programs, or excuse me, the states have their own bond programs. So basically they would have to change the law in order for us to get this funding. The one that I looked at was where it talked about the water, which was very important because, as you know, Jackson State's water system is, of course, where they're getting repaired in Jackson, but that would take a long time. And Jackson State needs its own water system. So physical infrastructure essential to support the projects authorized under this paragraph includes roads, sewers, and drainage systems and water, power, lighting, telecommunications, and other utilities. And it also says any other facility, equipment, or fixtures which is essential to the maintaining of accreditation of the member institution. So that's probably the most important one for Jackson State, which is the water, the sewage, and draining systems. The only problem with Jackson State is Jackson State, Alcorn, and Valley are not able to participate in this program. And the reason why we are not able to participate in this program is because there's literally a state law that prohibits us from participating. The state has their own municipal bonds. So I was just like, wait, Mississippi has its own municipal bonds. So why are we not able to get a separate water system for Jackson State? So now I'm getting ready to show you what type of conundrum we're in at Jackson State, which is this bill. It says an act to authorize the issuance of state general obligations, bonds, blah, 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 blah. So this is this is from Mississippi. I looked up the bills that are always introduced. Mind you, bonds or these types of loans, they have to be paid back. We can't even get that. It says an act to authorize the issuance of state general obligation bonds to provide funds for the cost of construction of a separate water system for Jackson State University, to provide for all of the water needs of the university and for related purposes. So we can never get it through even committee. We can't get it through committee. So my next question, yeah, right. We have the bonds available. Mississippi refuses to even let it doesn't even get out of committee. So Jackson State is kind of like stuck right now in limbo. We cannot get the bonds from Mississippi because it dies in committee every single time. We're also not able to participate in the HBCU Capital Finance Program because Mississippi prohibits state institutions from getting funding from this federal program. And it's not just this federal program. He wanted to make sure to let me know no state institution like Mississippi State, which they wouldn't qualify anyway because they're not an HBCU. But he just wanted to let me know that Mississippi has their own bonds. And the only way that Jackson State would be able to participate in this program is if Mississippi changes that law. And then they said, would this ruling affect the requirement for JSU to have a minimum number of white students? That is a very interesting question. So with regard to the Ayers case, the Ayers case was Mississippi was sued for maintaining an unconstitutional dual system of higher education. So the federal question, I believe, is different, which I would have to reread through, which I've read the Fordyce case before. But the settlement money, basically, I think we're in the last, either the funding is stopping this year or it's stopping next year. The funding has already been exhausted. So for the most part, it's not going to change anything because the money has been exhausted. So next, I want to talk about FAMU. Brother Bakari touched on this, I think, like a week and a half ago, about the students that are suing the state over less funding for their HBCU in a class action lawsuit, the separate but equal tactics. I feel like every HBCU needs to file a federal lawsuit at this point. Because with affirmative action gone, there's already low amount of admissions for Black students. So we're only going to see an increase in not an increase. We'll see a decrease in admissions for Black students. And that's not to say that they're not qualified. There's a lot of Black students that are qualified. We're not saying that because you're Black, you're getting in. Because you're Black, you're holding these institutions accountable. And they're not going to say, I'm not going to let them in because they're Black. So now they can say it. Implicitly, they have the option to say, I don't want to admit this person. And they know that there will not be any consequences for it because they don't have to do it any longer. So you need to see an influx of federal lawsuits. I would say federal, because at this point you do want to get it to the Supreme Court. That would include, even though it's the states that are actively all underfunding HBCUs, it's a federal question because it's not equal. Separate but equal is a constitutional right. So we need a class action suit. And I would say make up some ridiculous number, like, I don't know, $3 trillion. The reason why you want to make a ridiculous amount like $3 trillion is because you want to actually settle the case. You're never going to get what you're owed, but creating the fact that you all get on one accord, because this is only going to get worse. They got rid of diversity and inclusion and equity. They got rid of that. And they attacked it in Texas. They attacked it in the state of Florida. They're trying to bring it up in the state of Mississippi, which is kind of like, Mississippi's racist. You guys don't really have that anyway. So basically what happens in one state, you will see it pop up all across the nation. And it's not just red states either. It's blue states as well. I would venture to say that a lot of these universities are going to have to definitely change the way that they do their admissions. I know a lot of complaints with HBCUs is the financial aid process. Another issue is, we're not able to register this, that, and the third. There's a lot of issues that those things have to be resolved before you try to include larger amounts of people. And I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to do a call-in show today for anybody that wants to speak specifically on what they feel will happen with the Supreme Court case, what will happen to HBCUs. If you want to share your thoughts, please call in. This is my first time trying this call-in show, but I would love to hear your thoughts on where do you think we go from here? What types of changes do you think will happen? And is this a win for HBCUs? I feel like we could turn this into a positive for sure. But it has to be. You guys can also call in on StreamYard. But please use the call-in button, or the number is 218-433-8843 if you want to call in and share your thoughts regarding the Supreme Court decision and what you feel like will happen. Let me see. And let's just go ahead and look at the Ayers case real quick. Just for a summary, we got a $503 million settlement. So some of the issues with the Ayers case is, of course, that we had to have 10% minority, or excuse me, it would have been minority at a HBCU, but basically we had to have non-minority enrollment at 10%, which was like basically white people to come to our universities before we could get access to a certain type of before you get access to it. So that's why Mississippi Valley State and Alcorn was not able to access the funds as quickly as Jackson State. Jackson State was able to get there before the other two universities, and that could be just due to the location. In 2004, there was an appeal to the settlement, except for the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear it. And I'm going to go over that Ayers case because it's interesting that one of the things that they did in this settlement agreement, which I did not agree with, is the state was supposed to get, I think, like $50 million was supposed to be raised, and there's only $1 million in there, but they put in the legal writing that if they're not able to raise the $50 million, that doesn't invalidate the settlement. So they just didn't even bother. They were like, oh, okay, so that means we don't necessarily have to do it. So the only thing that I would say that's pretty harrowing is that Ayers litigation took 25 years. It happened before, in 1987. is when it happened in district court. That's when the first trial took place. And then it went to the Supreme Court in 1992. And for me, I felt like if you guys already have waited 20 plus years or 30 plus years, that they should have definitely not settled, because the Supreme Court already said that Mississippi had not done enough to undo the separate but equal. It wasn't equal. And the Supreme Court, each time that they went back, said, it's not equal. You're not doing enough to make sure that it's equal. But instead of overturning or letting the Supreme Court do what they needed to do, they basically allowed for a settlement. It says, it's going to be interesting to see how this affects Black athletes and their college versus family discussions will be interesting. So the thing about Black athletes, and you'll see it even in the Shannon Sharps of the world, who he went to an HBCU, but he's always speaking about if he had a choice, that would have been his first choice. I feel like Black athletes are, especially highly touted ones who are getting scholarships, sometimes they are buffered from knowing what racism looks like. And you'll see it when you hear Ed Reed make questionable statements, or let me think of other Black college athletes. Can anybody name some Black college athletes who are just basically tone deaf and know nothing about HBCUs? There's a lot of them that they got scholarships. They got paid deals under the table, especially in the 90s and 2000s. So their look on, or their outlook on college is, I got paid, my schooling was paid for, and I got an NIL deal. So for me, I don't think that Black athletes, they're already in that space anyway. If you're going to Colorado, which I'm not trying to be shady, but the Black enrollment is like 3%. And if you go watch some of Shiloh's videos, he says, hey, it's another Black person. And then he says, well, Stephen A. Smith went to Winston-Salem State, didn't he? Those are Black men who actually went to HBCUs. That's even worse. Des Bryant. Des Bryant is the perfect example of a student athlete that went to a white college. Mind you, race was definitely, back then, it was more noticeable, the climate of race. And yet when you hear some of these athletes talking, they basically act like racism wasn't a thing. You know, that's not, that they're not talking about me. So Shiloh made a statement. He said, are you a student athlete too? He's like, I'm trying to look for somebody who's not a student athlete. So basically what I'm saying is this. Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, Stephen A. Smith, he's a good example because he went to an HBCU, and yet he basically talks, he doesn't necessarily defend his HBCU, his alma mater. Shannon A. Sharp, he went to an HBCU, and yet they're always talking about how they would have wanted to go to a white university. So I think student athletes, we shall see if they realize you're only wanted here because you're making the school money. Outside of that, they do not want you here. And they're going to make sure that you don't have to be here by getting rid of it. And it's interesting that they say that most Americans wanted to end affirmative action, but you don't hear them talking about legacy emissions. I'm interested in talking about legacy emissions. Why are people allowed to get in just because my mom went there and so I'm getting in? And it has, if you have bad grades, you're not that smart, or your ACT wasn't that good, that's okay. Your mom went there. So they didn't ban legacy admissions. They banned making it equal. And like Brother Bakari, points out, Florida and Texas were the first two states to do away with diversity, inclusion, and equality. They must have had a heads up that affirmative action was no longer going to be a thing. What I do, I haven't seen a statement from the NAACP, but what I will say is this. Okay, so they did release, we're going to look at that. The NAACP condemns SCOTUS ruling on affirmative action. This is for immediate release. It says, today, the Supreme Court of the United States issued extreme decisions reversing decades of precedent on affirmative action. The court rulings in Students for Fair Admissions versus President and the Fellows of Harvard College and Student for Fair Admissions versus University of North Carolina jeopardized hard-fought progress for Black Americans in classrooms and beyond. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. How do they think that Harvard, a place that has less than 5% Black enrollment, is taking away from an Asian American who is also a minority? It says they won't ban legacy due to millions in donations. So the reason why they won't, we should also be hearing a statement from the Urban League, Pan-Hellenic Council, etc. And I'll look and see if they've issued a statement. For me, the statement isn't harsh enough for me. And also the action. Let's see what they'll do today. So they're saying that they're going to lead a group of students and activists in a mobilization starting at the Supreme Court steps. While I do not have a problem with people protesting, at the end of the day, this is the Supreme Court. This is the law of the land. You protesting out there isn't going to do anything. What I would have liked to have seen in response to this particular Supreme Court decision, I would have liked to have seen a federal lawsuit filed stating that legacy admissions and admissions based on geography are unconstitutional. Like, you should have done that. It says legacy preferences may violate the Nobility Clause and the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution by creating a hereditary privilege and discriminating on the basis of ancestry. So that's what I feel like. You have to fight back. You can't just sit up here and let them. You're going to let them ban affirmative action and then you don't have an answer for it. The other answer is, of course, that HBCUs need money to, I'm pretty sure by next fall, they might have double enrollment. Might have double the amount enrolled at HBCUs. not necessarily double enroll, but maybe double the amount of like people either transferring or people trying to get into HBCUs. So we need to have an answer. And also, North Carolina A&T got fined for having too many out-of-state students. So we also need to get that taken care of. Who would the lawsuit target? File a lawsuit against. Okay. So the lawsuit would target. You would have to find students who apply to Harvard, or you would find students who are out of state that applied for admissions in California, because California has this admission, I think it's USC, where if you live in the state of California, you get preferential treatment over being admitted over somebody who's out of state. Also, for Harvard, or let me see what other schools have. I think Harvard is one of the largest ones that have the legacy admissions. Let's see what other PFC, which for me, I'm not going to say I'm mad about it. Georgetown has legacy admissions. Let's see. And it says legacies are more likely to attend. Legacy students, nearly 3/4, 74% agreed to come and enroll. So basically, the majority of the spots that are taken at all of these schools, they have the propensity to be a big donor. So 42% of legacy graduates are potentially top donors, which could include their whole family. So these types of institutions, not only are they elitist in accepting mostly non-minorities, but they look for who is the mother, the father, the grandfather. So that's why they have legacy admissions, because they provide the money. That you want to know how they have endowments that are that high? It's because their mothers and fathers and grandmothers have money. And if you probably do some research on where they got all that money, it probably dates back to even slavery, or them being able to benefit off of slavery. It says specific individuals who've been affected by legacy would have to file a suit. That would be very difficult. Not really. You can get a class action. I mean, this is the thing. Just like there are test cases. So the people or the organization that won today, they found specific cases that are already either in litigation. You can look all throughout the country and you find test cases that match what you're trying to do. And then you put the money behind it, the organizations behind it, and you have different organizations file amicus briefs, which means they're going to file their own reasoning for why affirmative action should be struck down or affirmative action should stay. So we already see that there's an attack on HBCUs. So this isn't over. This is just the beginning. So the first thing that we saw them do was they struck down the diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's probably one of the first steps that they did. So you saw Florida and Texas do it, but what you don't know is in other places, now that affirmative action has been deemed unconstitutional, all of those programs of diversity, inclusion, they're going to be shut down at all universities, not just the ones in red states, blue states too. And I think that that's fair. People will eventually start falling. And you know what? More than likely, the people that would be able to win for the lawsuits of legacy admissions, they actually don't look like us. Meaning they'll push the case behind a white woman who feels like she should have been admitted. She's not benefiting from affirmative action anymore, so she's not getting admitted. So then they will probably start attacking legacy. Back to focusing on HBCUs and what we need to do to get ready and prepared for the influx. We've gone over this several different times, but I think it's always worth. Oh, here's Mr. Walker. Hey, how you doing, Mr. Walker?
Hey, sweetheart. Wow. Wow. I'm sorry I'm late to the party.
No, thank you
Guys,
for coming in.
I was in a meeting with my staff, and the alert came on, and I was like, man, what's Timona doing? And so I looked on Twitter first, and I'm seeing all this, but I didn't have time to read it, so that's why I immediately just logged on. But are you serious? This happened today?
Yep, they dropped it at like 10:15. I haven't seen what they did for the loans.
So my question is, because most of the times, as we old schoolers say, when we invite them to the cookout, they always get these minority grants just to go. So how is that? Will they use some of that money to promote more scholarships or something? Or grants?
I think they're
Or
actually going to shut those down. So we saw in Florida and we saw in Texas how they started attacking DEI.
uh-huh.
I think they're actually going to start shutting those down. You're actually going to see a lot of diversity hires that were hired specifically for those types of like positions.
Wow.
They're going to actually lose their job. And they're going to lose their job because for schools who were doing that, they no longer are required to do it.
Right. So pretty much
So this isn't
how
just
how how we required to have masters, PhDs, they can just come in. Wow. Wow.
so they're going to actually see some layoffs in those types of departments where because there's a lot of diversity hires that are in those types of positions, and we're going to see the reduction of those. They're going to either close those programs down. So this isn't just affecting students' abilities to get money. This is going to be one of those situations where there's going to be a mass exodus of or shutting down of those programs. And that's not even to say that those programs aren't still needed, but they're not required to do so. So they're not going to do it. So you're going to see an influx of people that work for these particular PWIs, and they're no longer going to have positions. And they said that the majority of DEI positions are held by white women, and even so, those white women will be laid off. Like they're just going to close those departments down. So that's why I said that. What do we as HBCUs need to do to get prepared? Like, what do you think? What do you think we need to do to get prepared for the
That's a good
influx?
question. That's a good question.
Not just so the main one, of course, I said, well, the number one is housing because we're having issues with that now. But it's not even just housing. It's we need more funding to be able to hire more financial aid counselors, more professors, more. That means we need more classes. If you have more students, you're going to need more of everything. But I think
See, my biggest fear is right now, is that because I remember years ago when Ronald Mason was at Jackson State, you know, before he was, you know, voluntarily let go, they was trying to combine and calling it University of Mississippi at Jackson. So my
right.
question is to you is, do you guys see that, or do you guys think, and is Israel, Uncle Picard, Chris, all you guys out there in the chat, what's your thoughts on them trying to take over and consolidate? Because I can really, really see that happening now, and it wouldn't be anything that we can do.
Well, I don't think they can do Alcorn because it's a land grant. If I remember
Right,
correctly, that was one of the
right,
things. You can't do that
right.
with Alcorn. For me, it's going to be hard to do that with Jackson State.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are getting a new president, so you know that they're probably doing something at IHL to try to usher that in. But it's just going to be darn near impossible for you to try to merge the HBCUs when I think that the HBCUs are going to be able to benefit from affirmative action, but we just have to be prepared for it. So getting rid of affirmative action, I don't see any other way but an influx of students coming to HBCUs. So the only issue, which I think you probably missed it, but this is the thing that we're going to have to do specifically for North Carolina HBCUs and HBCUs in Mississippi. There has to be some legislation which changes the ability for HBCUs to be able to participate in the capital financing program.
Oh yeah, but you know, Tater Tot, he gonna do everything to kill that. So no.
I mean, that's the only way that we would be able to get our own water system, because we keep applying for the bonds at the state level and it never gets out of committee.
Yeah, but he and Lumumba, they really at odds, because you know it's just one of those things. You know, with Tater Tot, it's kind of like, you know, basically he's coming at Mayor Lumumba, as, you know, how dare you question me?
Well, I do know that Florida, in the state of Florida, that FAMU, which I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I want to say that Ron DeSantis was the governor at the time, that Florida did have to, like, FAMU had to get legislation changed in order for them to participate. And they were able to get legislation changed so that they would be able to participate. So I think that even like we see them filing, or not necessarily filing, but introducing legislation at the Mississippi legislature in order to get the bonds for the water system. We see it happening. So for me, I would say introduce legislation to be able to, I guess, maybe change the wording so that HBCUs are able to participate. Now, of course, I wouldn't even put in the water system. I wouldn't put nothing in there about water system. I would just, as a legislator, I would just say an act to authorize Mississippi Valley State, Jackson State University, and Alcorn State the ability to participate in the HBCU Finance Capital Program, because that's the only way they're going to get bonds to be able to work on their infrastructure. It's going to be denied every single time. But HBCUs could possibly benefit from this. We just have to work on the infrastructure.
That's why we can, as a culture, and thank you for bringing this up, and shouts out to you and the channel and people in the chat. But let me just say something here. I'm very big on education, of course. I was raised that way. But we have to take it a step further. We have to be big on educating people and educating one another, because our days, we just can't go day to day and not learn anything and not reach out and not educate one another. And I just hope that the chat sees, and also the HBCU space, aka the culture, really, really open your eyes right now. And that same fortitude that you had as far as getting educated, whether it's through a book, whether it's through a college degree, whether it's through a high school diploma, whether it's through a GED, we're gonna have to start putting all that stuff to use.
Right.
Like now. Not saying, okay, well, tomorrow is Friday. I hope you guys understand now that there's no days off.
Right.
Wow, this is really,
which I think for a lot of so this would possibly change even enrollment for as early as the spring, right? Because it becomes effective immediately. So it's June. I would think that a lot of these different programs will be shut down by August.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, they're gonna move fast with this. And
So
that's so
I guess
crazy
the
that
next
they're
step
doing it during the damn summer. It's crazy.
it's the next is maybe even rolling out a program or rolling out marketing. We want you here. You know what I'm saying? No, HBCUs want you here. I want to say, was it Prairie View that just had a engineering building?
Right.
Top of the line engineering. And I'm sure they're going to probably get funding from UNCF. But basically, what I'm saying is there's a lot to be said with what we currently have. Like, we have some quality programs. And like you said, we have master's degrees and doctorates. So it's not like the HBCUs don't have what is needed. The issue is we need to get the students to realize that HBCUs, you're not taking lesser than by coming to us. Come back to your roots.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, because even, in some of my circles, some of my advanced degrees, it's like the respect is more for those as opposed to my both undergraduate HBCU degrees. But but I'm a fighter.
Right.
I always bring it up. Like, if it wouldn't been for Tougaloo, if it wouldn't have been for Jackson State, I wouldn't have known how to study.
Right.
I didn't know. I didn't know. I was used to leaving the Kappa party and going and writing a paper.
Right.
Because I was at HBCUs and it was demanded. And if you wasn't in class, my mama, well, back then we had them pagers. And I'm getting a 911 from my mama, talking about some where you at?
Right.
Because your professor called me.
Oh Lord.
So, man.
So I'm trying to find
it ain't one thing, it's another.
I think it's completed. I can't find the pictures right now, but Prairie View A&M, which Jackson State already has an engineering building. Texas has a law school. North Carolina Central has a law school. And so this is the new engineering building at Prairie View, $70 million. It's a classroom and research building, beautiful facility. So they just, I want to say this just got completed within the last week or so that they've completed it. So there you go right there. You have quality programs. So for HBCUs, it's just a matter of letting them know that we want you here and not to be discouraged or dismayed, because a lot of these students, and that's not to say that Black people aren't qualified to go to some of these universities.
Right.
I don't mean that at all.
Well, maybe we can work on in a couple of years, maybe getting a law school there at GSU.
How? I think
we gotta butter up the right people. It sounds like we got to butter up the right doggone people. And get in certain circles, because this is crazy. I mean, because even with MC downtown, that's still a private institution, but and the only public law school is Ole Miss, but that's Wayland, Oxford.
I would even say, even with Presley in office, let's just say hypothetically that he does get elected, you would still need to have more Democratic legislatures, or else it's going to be kind of like how Obama did his second term.
Oh yeah.
You know, where you're not getting anything done at all anyway, because Republicans are going to make sure that nothing else is pushed through.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's just, and then in Mississippi, that's why I'm so sad right now for my home state, because whether you go to school there, whether you were raised there, Mississippi is always home. And for something like this to happen, that's just, oh man.
And then they said that somebody asked in the question in the inbox, or excuse me, in the comments, they were saying, like, what do you think will happen to black athletes? But what I said was, Black athletes, for the most part, I mean, they are sheltered to the impact of affirmative action because they have a scholarship, because they have their stuff paid for. So a lot of times they aren't privy to, I guess they're kind of sheltered from it, because if they're a Black athlete, more than likely they're on the team with other Black athletes. So they don't necessarily see the impact of, you're not going to see any Black people here unless they're student athletes.
The student athletes, yeah.
Or much. Or if you're at a PWI, you already see that anyway.
Of course, yeah. The only thing at PWI is, I mean, even when I was at Mississippi State and Memphis, places like that, I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, the only Black people there was the athletes and the Greeks. I mean, and maybe a couple students here or there, but it was basically just the athletic department and the Greeks. That was pretty much it.
Someone in the comments said Jackson State needs a nursing school. Wow.
Yeah, that would be good. I mean, you got what, Nursing Allied there. That's through Hines. Yeah, that would be good.
I think they said the reason why they were struggling with creating a nursing school is because they said it was competition to the JUCO schools.
Right.
So that's why it was hard for us to get one of those done.
But Alcorn has one.
But do they? Is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's located in Natchez, Mississippi. It's a separate building, campus, however you want to say it. It's separate, but it's a Alcorn State University nursing degree. It's a BSN degree, and they also have an AA for nursing as well.
Well, then they might be able to, if they got to agreeing to too much stuff, like, oh yeah, you guys can have a law school. Oh yeah, you can have a nursing school. Then I would be kind of like looking at them sideways, like, oh, okay, y'all are trying to do something fishy here.
Like, yeah, just like that.
Y'all are trying to take over Jackson State at this point.
That's what led with my first statement, that right there. I'm more afraid than anything, because that was the first thing that went through my mind, because I remember that snake ass Ronald Mason was trying to do it underhand, and of course through research and all this other stuff, word of mouth, and forensic technologists finding stuff. it was immediately shut down. But my biggest fear is now I hope they don't have the autonomy to say, oh well, hell, what the hey, who cares what they think?
The only I guess the only good thing about affirmative action being struck down is obviously it might take 2 or 3 years, but in 2 to 3 years, you'll see even the numbers that are, it's probably like less than 5%, you'll see even those numbers shrink. So if you see those numbers shrink, then that means that HBCUs are needed. Unless you're just
Yeah,
saying
but
that African Americans aren't supposed to be educated at all.
right.
If
And
that's
see,
what you guys are saying.
That's the thing, because I believe locally in Jackson, as far as the nursing schools, you got the Hines, you got the Holmes Community College. I think Bellhaven has one. Uh, so there's a lot of program, and what's so bad about it, because I used to sit on the HCA board, and they're actually, because in different states, the Baptist health systems actually in most states except for Mississippi has their own nursing school. So that will probably be coming sooner than later.
Mm, 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 mm.
Wow. Oh. Dadgummit. Wow. Wow. We
I
just gotta
mean,
fight. Everybody in the chat, whatever you bring to the table, and I definitely appreciate you, Nisi Pooh, and bringing this out, especially enlighten people like me that while I'm at work, I'm Twitter blowing up and all this stuff. Oh, and thank you for introducing me to Twitter too, because I do because you kept talking about Twitter for months, and I hear y'all always saying Twitter, so that's why I joined. But
that's the
but yeah,
fastest way to get, well, sometimes it's misinformation, but it's the fastest way to get information. You're going to know what's
yeah, yeah, because I don't do the Facebook anymore and stuff like that, because my job, and because I know the last time I had it, which was like in 2015, no, 2014, and when 45 and all that stuff, and I had, let's just say I had a diverse group of friends, and logged on one morning, and I had about 460 something comments going back and forth, and that's when I was like, nah, I can't do that. Can't risk the job. But wow, this is crazy. Wow.
I'm
It
going to
all
read.
started. It all began with that fake ass, and excuse my French, I ain't trying to get your flag, but that old fake butt um, tea party, inviting those college presidents to the White House.
Right.
That's when it began. That's exactly when it began, and that's why he was so adamant about getting those radical Supreme Court justices in, and with this new lady, with the latest one that came in that was overly qualified, took a huge pay cut, took a step down from what she was doing, and run her through the ringer.
Mm, mm,
That's
mm, mm.
crazy.
So before I get off, I am going to read First Lady Michelle Obama. She shared her thoughts regarding the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action. Action. She said, "Back in college, I was one of the few Black students on my campus, and I was proud of getting into such a respected school. I knew I'd worked hard for it, but still, I sometimes wondered if people thought I got there because of affirmative action. It was a shadow that students like me couldn't shake, whether those doubts came from outside or inside our own minds. But the fact is this: I belonged, and semester after semester, decade after decade, for more than half a century, countless students like me showed they belonged too. It wasn't just the kids of color who benefited either. Every student who heard a perspective they might not have encountered, who had an assumption challenge, who had their minds and their hearts open, gained a lot as well. It wasn't perfect, but there's no doubt that it helped offer new ladders of opportunity for those who throughout our history have too often been denied a chance to show how fast they can climb. Of course, students on my campus and countless others across the country were and continue to be granted special consideration for admissions. Some have parents who graduated from the same school. Others have families who can afford coaches to help them run faster or hit a ball harder. Others go to high schools with lavish resources for tutors and extensive standardized test prep that help them score higher on college entrance exams. We don't usually question if those students belong. So often we just accept that money, power, and privilege are perfectly justifiable forms of affirmative action, while kids growing up like I did are expected to compete with the ground when the ground is anything but level. So today, my heart breaks for any young person out there who's wondering what their future holds and what kind of chances will be open to them. And while I know the strength and grit that lies inside kids who have always had to sweat a little more to climb the same ladder, I hope and I pray that the rest of us are willing to sweat a little too. Today is a reminder that we've got to do work, not just to enact policies that reflect our values of equity and fairness, but to truly make those values real in all of our schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods. And she said, if you're interested in supporting organizations who have long been advocating for this cause, check this out. She does have United Negro College Fund on there, and she also has Thurgood Marshall College Fund. So she has also the Dream US, APIA Scholars. So she named two places which, if a person disagrees with it, they might go ahead and donate money to the UNCF and Thurgood Marshall. So, like I said, this affirmative action being banned is an opportunity for HBCUs to be able to gather around and maybe crowdfund from some of these larger institutions.
Do you think it's going to be any curriculum changes?
Oh, absolutely. I'm gonna let Dr. McKinnis get on and share his thoughts, but absolutely, there's going to be there. We already seen the bans. Hello, Dr. McKinnis.
Hey, how you doing? I'm actually, not Dr. McKinnis. You can just call me C. Lee or
Oh,
C.
okay.
Lee. Yeah.
Okay.
The only thing
Hey, see, Lee, man, it's said, man. How are you, man?
Hey, good brother Walker, how you doing?
Man, it's okay, man. I like I said, I was kind of late to the party, but phone was blowing up, and I saw Timona, and I was like, oh Lord. So,
Well, look,
man, I'm gonna be on mute, man, and drop me some more knowledge. Keep me going. Keep me going.
Well, like I said, I'm not going to be on long because I'm one of those people. I like to read the judge's opinions. So that's what I would tell everybody is that you have the ruling. Now we need to make sure we read the opinions because the opinions are going to be important because what this is just one element, and a lot of people need to understand that affirmative action has always been a two-pronged fight, one in education and one in economics. And the battle for those who've always been against affirmative action, and I'll discuss that in a second, but it's always been that if we can end it either in education, we can end it in economics, or if we can end it in economics, we can end it in education. And so with this Supreme Court ruling, will also make room for is the ending of any government set-asides that are connected to race. So that means that not only are you looking at, say, ending affirmative action as it relates to enrollment in education, you're possibly looking at extending that to government contract set-asides, where now the government will no longer have a percentage of contracts set aside for Black businesses. So this is going to be further than just college enrollment. It's going to be anything that has to do with, can you connect the awarding of anything to race or race set-asides. And so I think the next shoe to fall will be, how will we begin to administer government contracts, if that makes sense?
Will this also affect programs like that they have for HUD, like for race, regarding like minorities being able to get access to these loans when they take certain classes?
Yeah,
like urban and housing development.
Yeah, it'll be anything. What this does is that, because if you go back to the original case from the University of Michigan, right? So one of the original Supreme Court cases that was the one for the University of Michigan, it was specifically the verbiage was specifically about connecting rewards and enrollment to race, right? And then they were very specific in how they were approaching that litigation. And so anything that has now to do with and what people need to understand about affirmative action is and the misnomer about affirmative action is that affirmative action is not just based on race. I think that's the misnomer. So we think that what affirmative action is, you're black, so you automatically get enrolled, or you're black, you automatically get this contract, right? No, what affirmative action essentially was that what was happening is that colleges and companies, and I have to tell people that this is both about colleges, but it's also about companies. As you guys do who know in the work field, a college or a company will say, we're going to have this rating standard. So we're going to have this rating standard, and what we want to do is we want to hire everybody who falls within 100 to 80. So everybody in our rating standard who falls within 100 to 80, that's who we're going to hire. That's who we're going to admit. The problem and what caused the need for affirmative action is you had black people who would fall within that rating of 100 to 80 who still wouldn't get hired or who still wouldn't get admitted. It wasn't that they were hiring or admitting black people who were below the 80 percentile. Does that part make sense, Sister SheLovesThee?
Yes.
And so then what happens now is that what any affirmative action does, it says that now companies can say, hey, we want to use other things. Because, so for instance, let's say you got a white person who went to Harvard. We'll just use Harvard, right? And let's say that person scored an 85. But then we'll say that Sister Aquay scored a 90. Even though Sister Aquay scored a 90, Harvard is going to say, I'm going to bring in the white person who scored the 80 because that person is a Harvard legacy. And see, that's the thing that people that attack affirmative action doesn't understand, is that there are all kinds of items that can be used other than grades. So for instance, schools use legacy. So there are a lot of people who in that legacy won't be in the 90 percentile, but they'll be in the 80 percentile, and they'll get chosen over a black person who will be in the 90 percentile. And so that's the other part about affirmative action that a lot of people are missing. But yeah, so they're not going to remove legacy. They're not going to remove, say, other things. The only thing that they're removing is race. But there'll be other elements that they'll say that, hey, if you're in that 100 to 80 and can get employed or get admitted, and you're a legacy, or I'm trying to think of there's other things that have to do with geographic locale. There's some other kind of historical things other than legacy. The only thing that's being removed is race. And because black people didn't tend to have a lot of legacy and a lot of those other things, that was the thing that protected them. What affirmative action really did was protected black people who made the grade, who had the standard, but still did not get enrolled or get the contract simply because they were black.
Which is needed because obviously we need it for equity purposes. It's never going to be, we were never going to be equal.
Right.
But my question to you then is this: what can HBCUs do to prepare for this influx? And are HBCUs going to be under attack as well?
Oh, no doubt. Because there's a lot of funding that's directed to HBCUs that's related to race. And that's both public and private. And so this is not just going to impact PWIs. There's certain amounts of funding that now they're going to attack and say, well, this particular money won't be all the money, but this particular money that you earmarked. So let's say HBCUs could see anywhere from, say, 5 to 25% of their funding decrease, depending on how much of that funding is connected to race. I don't want to speak out of turn because again, I want to read some things. But so, for instance, a school like Howard, if I'm not mistaken, because DC doesn't have state, Howard gets a lot of federal funding, right? So unlike the other HBCUs, they get state funding, and there's always been a move by Congress to find ways to limit the amount of federal funding that Howard gets, simply because they wanted to make sure that Howard would never grow. And so then the question becomes that now this comes on the table, not just Howard, but for any HBCU that's specifically getting monies that's earmarked as a race set aside, those monies could be in jeopardy as well.
Another question, because you said that it was struck down on considering race, so that means that affirmative action based on gender is still.
That's why I need to see the Supreme Court opinions, because
if that happens, doesn't that mean white women will still?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So the question is, will they still be able to use gender? And then that's the question. That's the question. And then that's why I say I need to see, because what's been the forefront of this has been affirmative action based on race, right? But we know that affirmative action has been both race and gender, and has also been a few other things. So what I need to see, and that's why I wanted to read the Supreme Court opinion, the both the dissenting opinion and the affirming opinion. That's what I want everybody to know. That whenever the Supreme Court gives a ruling, there's two opinions. There's the affirming opinion, that is the side that voted, that won. They give their affirming opinion. Then there's a dissenting opinion, and so the people, the people who vote against this but lost, they also get to publish an opinion. And those opinions, both of those opinions, will be how the next round of lawsuits will be will be structured.
Which it's 237 pages long.
Yeah, well, exactly.
So it's very long. That's something that's going to take a while to get through.
Right. Oh, no doubt. But the one thing about it is there are people. So, for instance, because my wife has worked with One Voice and NAACP, there are people that their sole job is just to read Supreme Court rulings and Supreme Court opinions. So, for instance, I'm forget about the Southern Poverty Law Center. Southern Poverty Law Center. They have people that all they do is read Supreme Court rulings and Supreme Court opinions. So it won't take longer than 2 or 3 days for folks who want to keep affirmative action to go through this, read it, read the affirming opinions, read the dissenting opinions, and then be able to now kind of structure, where do we go from here?
I mean, wouldn't an attack on legacy admissions or geographical admissions, wouldn't attacking that, or even attacking based on gender, like, aren't those things that people should, if you're saying you can't base it on race, then wouldn't you as an organization attack those as well, or do you let those stand?
That's a good question. And I don't want, because we've had those discussions before, and I don't want to say yes or no simply because there are sides to all of that. The question is, do you want to attack those, or do you want to use those to fight to get race back in? Because here's the thing. Remember, let's go back to that 100 to 80, right? Let's go back to that 100 to 80. What most people understand, and this is what because we got a lot of college educated people and people apply for jobs. What most people understand is that once you make 81 to 100, right? So you whatever you make to be considered for the college enrollment, or to consider to get an interview with this job, what we know is that the numbers get you into the room. Your GPA gets you into the room, right? Your whatever you have that allows you to rank, gets you into the interview. But what all schools and companies know is that once you have the transcript, then it becomes the personality, character, and creativity. Like, companies are very shrewd to understand that someone who scored an 83 may be better for our company than someone who scored a 93, because that someone who scored a 93 may be closer to a demographic to which we're trying to sell our product. Someone who scored an 85 may be better than someone who scored a 95 for our enrollment, because that person may meet something for one of our programs that the person that scored the 95 may not meet for one of our programs that we're trying to develop. And so that's why you want to, you look at the legacy, you look at the gender, you look at all those other things, because that's the argument that's often made, is that the bare minimum of the academic standard gets you in the room, gets you considered, but then it's your character, personality, and holistic portfolio that determines whether or not you're right for this school or whether or not you are right for this job. And I'll give you an example. I've written, I taught at Jackson State full-time for 25 years. I can't tell you how many letters of recommendations I've written for students leaving Jackson State going to grad school, how many letters of recommendation I've written for students going into the workforce. And those letters of recommendations that I write don't just deal with the student's intellectual aptitude. It deals with the student's character. It deals with any kind of internships that students have. It deals with that student's creativity. So we all know that just numbers, just GPA alone, no one has ever just, so when people say, let's get rid of all these quotas and let's just do GPA, no school, no job has ever just hired people just on transcript alone, just because they know that numbers don't tell the whole story. And for those of us who spent the last 25, 30 years writing letters of recommendation, we don't just discuss the student's GPA. We highlight the student's GPA. And so that's what you're discussing. And when you're discussing all those other elements, is would it be best to focus on just race, or to discuss how race relates to those other aspects, such as gender, such as geographic location, such as legacy, how all of those combine to tell a holistic story, so we can have a holistic student population and we can have a holistic workforce. Often, you know why companies get in trouble, why companies make bad decisions? Because they don't have enough type of people in the room to say, hey, don't do that, that's stupid. Every time a company has a commercial or a promotion that offends somebody, it's because they didn't have somebody in the room to say, hey, that's stupid, that's offensive, or that won't work. So it's not, so that's proof that it's not just about the numbers, it's about how do we create a system in which we get a holistic evaluation of the people we're bringing to our campus and the people that we're hiring, if that makes sense.
So I don't think that we even knew the ramifications of affirmative action and what this means on an economic scale, or I don't think we even took that into account.
Right.
So one thing I pointed out was like the diversity, inclusion, the equity, all those departments at these PWIs, they're probably going to be phased out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Given a pink slip.
Well, if they're smart, what they will do, however, is they won't necessarily be phased out, although they will be streamlined greatly. One of the things that you would see PWIs do is their diversity wasn't just we need to get in diverse people. Often when you're discussing diversity, it's how can we create an academic pipeline? So I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. So Tougaloo and Brown has had a relationship for years. And Tougaloo and Brown's relationship goes back to Freedom Summer. It was like Freedom Summer, and Brown and Tougaloo developed this a relationship in this pipeline so that Tougaloo students get pipelined into Brown Medical School and then some of the other places. What Brown's diversity was all about doing was that, they knew that, hey, Tougaloo had these great students. The question was, how do we make sure that these great students, when they get here, stay here? So a lot of times diversity isn't just about identifying race or ethnicity. It's about saying what kind of programs can we develop to make sure that those people of certain races who don't tend to have all of the academic exposure get that exposure. So what I think you'll see happening is a lot of those diversity programs in PWIs, yes, they're going to get streamlined, yes, they're going to get cut, and they're going to be cut to the bare minimum. And then the question will be, okay, how do we work to pipeline to say, okay, how do we raise these students' grade averages? How do we do these things so that they are able to, on paper, compete just from a transcript standard and nothing else?
I can remember before deciding to come to Jackson State, my hometown is, of course, Columbia, Missouri. And they had like a summer program specifically tailored towards minorities, kind of like a bridge way to get into Mizzou. And upon completion of the program, you basically get a full ride to go to Mizzou. And of course, those type of programs also, I could see those being phased out as well, because they didn't explicitly say that it was based on race, but the majority of the students were minorities.
Well, yes and no. What will happen is they will now start to, instead of saying they'll start basing it not on race. They'll say if they're really serious about keeping the program, they'll switch it and say based on economic need. So what they'll say is that we're going to have these programs designed for communities that don't have that doesn't have a level of funding, and so we'll keep these bridge programs. Now here's the irony. The irony is that HBCUs were some of the greatest creators of bridge programs. In fact, many of the bridge programs that you see at PWIs and elsewhere were actually modeled off HBCU bridge programs. So that's kind of the irony of all of this, is that a lot of what's working. I'll give you an example. It's not necessarily a bridge program, but it's an advanced. I've taught in the Jackson Heart Study program at Tougaloo for 22 years. And that program, we've been so successful in that program it's a program for advanced Jackson metro area Black students. It's specifically designed for, and it came out of the Jackson Heart Study program. And so that program in Tougaloo, because I teach a literature science, but it's a science program. But I teach a literature science class in that program. That program has actually been implemented by Ole Miss and Tulane and other PWIs simply because of the success that Tougaloo has had with the Jackson Heart Study program. So it's always interesting that HBCUs are always at the forefront of bridge programs, and then PWIs come and take those bridge programs and do a better job because they have more money, are able to and then entice more of our students to their bridge programs. When schools like Tougaloo, Jackson State always had great bridge programs, and because we think that their ice water and all that is better, what have you. We leave our great bridge programs at our HBCUs and go over to the Ole Miss or UMMC, because UMMC didn't even have the program that they have now until after Tougaloo's program was so successful.
Once again, per usual, stealing the idea and implementing. It's what they love to do.
So, like I said, I just wanted to jump in and just put that little message that this is one leg. Admissions to college is one leg, but keep in mind that what this opens the door is anything that has a race base or a race criteria, including government funding, can now be attacked. What the Supreme Court has said is that we are open for the business or ending all government set-asides based on race, whether it's school or economics or anything else. So start talking. A lot of y'all who know Black folks who got great businesses, who get government contracts, we need to start looking at those kind of things, because that may be the next shoe to fall, will be independent Black contractors or Black businesses that get government contracts because of particular set-asides. Because the government, the federal government gives a certain amount of set-asides to make sure that they're awarding contracts to Black businesses.
Even with the proof that minorities are adversely affected, like, I wonder, does this also affect some of the programs tailored towards minority women for maternal health? Like, any type of funding for minority programs, then that would be affected. So even Black maternal health could possibly be affected.
Pretty much.
It's
I mean,
tailored
because
specifically for minority women, but that's because Black women are 3 times as likely to die in childbirth or have complications.
and I think that that's going to be the fight against it. Is what does the empirical evidence show? What does the science show? Right? And that's going to be the defense against it. But the fight is now open that anything that has to do with funding or awards or anything that's connected to race will be on the table. And that's for which, that's for what we have to, and I'll end on this because I don't, I've like, in the 90s, I wrote a lot of articles about this. And I just want to be transparent because, I was, me being a Black nationalist, I would always say, well, I'm a Black nationalist. So although I think affirmative action is a great program, since I'm a Black nationalist, I can tell you why affirmative action is good, but I was a Black nationalist, so I never fought as thoroughly for affirmative action as a lot of my brothers and sisters, simply because me being a Black nationalist. So, and so if people ever go out online and see some of those articles, they're like, well, you against affirmative action? Like, no, I wasn't against affirmative action. I was just saying that as a Black nationalist, affirmative action was more of an integrationist tool. And affirmative action was a great, I want to be clear, great integrationist tool. And I want to also be clear that I'm not saying that all integration is about assimilation. I want to also say that just because you are engaged in integration doesn't necessarily mean that you're engaged in assimilation. But I think that at this point, regardless of whether you're integrationist or Black nationalist, you need to understand that anything that has to do with, you can be awarded this based in some part on a racial set aside or set aside connected to race, that's on the table now to be discussed if there's something that can be ended.
Thank you so much for that insight.
No problem. I'm gonna jump up and
they basically telling us that we can't play the Black card anymore, huh?
And Brother Walker, and what's sad is that, and that's the misnomer, because I know, like you said, that you kind of have a joke, but it's that the misnomer is that it's not so much that we can't play the Black card. What we can't do now is, again, I want everybody to keep in mind that ratio, 100 to 80. That what they're saying is that if you are a Black person who can get within that 100 to 80, so if you can get an 81, they're saying that you getting that 81 no longer have anything that protects you from getting the 81 and still not being hired or still not being admitted when you've proven that you can reach the standard, if that makes sense.
Right, but this still, I deal with that on corporate America, though.
Yep.
I mean, I've been dealing with that throughout my entire career because just saying that, there's a lot of time that even with my experience, I had to be 3 times the amount of, experience and certified and all this other type of stuff. Now, have I been blessed and fortunate, to obtain, positions that the normal just U.S. citizen, period, Black or white, has attained? I'm fortunate in that sense, but this right here just got me at odds because of, legacy standards. The people that's going to come out, myself, yourself, Tamona, I'm thinking about her, young Braxton, how is it going to affect them? And that's like, man, it has me bewildered right now.
Yeah.
Like, seriously.
And I think that, like you said, and what Sister Tamona, what she mentioned is the amount of funding for high school academic programs around the country that, as you said, that may have a racial agenda, a race element to it, that how many of those particular programs, those kind of particular, what we call either enrichment programs or bridge programs, how many of those will go away as well?
So I wouldn't mind the affirmative action being gone as long as they made it equal. See, they're taking away affirmative action, and it's still not going to be separate and equal.
Right. Because again, and I know I keep coming back to this, because once you get over the 80 percentile, right? Everybody in the room has proven that, hey, I deserve to be here. There's nothing now that protects the black people who get over the 80%. Like, there's nothing for a black person to say, hey, I got a 92. Why did the white person that's an 84 get hired before me? I got an 83. Why did the white person that got the 82 get hired before me? Like that. That's what affirmative action was designed to do. It was designed to protect black people who could make the grades, make the scores. And yet, even despite that, still, that's actually how quotas, the reason quotas came in, and this is what people don't understand. They talk about we shouldn't have these quotas, we shouldn't have these 14% quota, 50. The reason quotas got eventually implemented was because they could actually show real data that certain percentages of black people were scoring higher and being rated higher than their white counterparts and still not being admitted to school and still not being hired. So the quotas came out of the empirical data that said, look at all these qualified black people that you're still, so since you are refusing to hire or admit qualified black people, we didn't have no recourse but to create a quota. That's what people don't realize. The quota got started after the empirical evidence said, oh, these black people are making the grades and you still not hiring them. You still not admitting them to your schools.
And that's my biggest concern, Brother Seeley. That's my concern there. Because you have to understand that the HBCU culture, network, however you want to say it, it sets a solid foundation. So we can go out and, basically challenge, but now it's kind of like it's going back to the conversation that we were having earlier that, okay, you went to an HBCU and how exceptional are you?
Right.
Can you do this at our school? And that's, man.
So exactly. So again, I just wanted to jump on. It's funny because I'm still, in fact, I'm headed to Tulu. I still teach that class. I retired from Jackson State. I still teach one class a semester, and one of them is I teach that literature science class it's a CDC. So the program in which I teach at Tougaloo is a CDC funded program, science program, and it's one of the rare programs that's designed for the best of the best black students in the Jackson metro area. Like, you got to be in the top 20% of your class even to apply for this program. And we've been having this program since I started teaching it in 2002. It started in 2001. So I've been teaching it now, 21 years. And when I tell you that the black children that we get, if they complete all 3 years of our program, they get scholarships to almost any college they want to attend. We improve these young people's ACT score anywhere from 2 to 5 points, right? That's a CDC program, right? Now, because that CDC program comes out of the need to get more black people into the medical field, because that's what the program was designed, to get more black people into the medical field. The question then becomes, are programs even like this on the chopping block when we have a 23-year history of improving ACTs and getting full scholarships to the young people who finish our program? I shut up, Brother Walker. I'm sorry.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm blown away, man. That's awesome. I mean, because I'm just thinking numbers like, man, that takes the average child from a 17 to a 19, or exactly. 17 to a 22. So that's awesome.
Yep.
Wow.
And we did it so well that Ole Miss, Tulane, and UMMC have copied our program, and now we're fighting to get those students. Like, so when it's kind of like HBCU, when we had all the best black students coming to us for 20-something years, and then Ole Miss and UMMC and Tulane were like, well, why are we just letting them best black high school students go to Tougaloo. And now we're fighting because although we have federal funding, Ole Miss and UMMC and Tulane have their own funding and can offer other things. Like we don't have the funding to let students stay there. So students have to come with us and then leave. With the Ole Miss program and the UMMC program, they have funding where they can do housing.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Right.
So look here, I'm gonna jump off because I got to get ready to go out here and run out here to, look at this tiger. Got to go out there to the Eagle Queen and the Bulldogs. I always see Tougaloo them by having two mascots. I'm like, hey, make up your mind. What's your mascot? Are you the Eagle Queen or you the Bulldog?
Eagle Queen, we love thee.
But Brother Walker, Sister SheLovesThee, and I see Doc jumped on. I appreciate y'all always on the battle line, and I'm gonna jump off and look here. I'll probably see y'all. Was that Friday night on the Ken Clark show? I mean on the 1400. So KC 1400 media. Talk to y'all later.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for teaching the youth.
Yes. That just opened up a whole can of worms, don't you think, Mr. Walker? Like,
oh yeah,
after he explained it like that, and the implications for more than just affirmative action for schools, this might implicate we need for if Biden is for minorities like he says he is, we need an executive order or something needs to be put into place to at least let us know that some of this funding is not going to be disrupted by this.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, because the thing about it, like I said, when I brought up young King Braxton, mommy is an HBCU, traditionalist. You see what I'm saying? So how is that going to affect? It's just, man, like I said, and I see it all the time. I've been saying the last 15 years. Being, on the executive side, and it's just, man, I can't play the token role no more, and there's a lot of opportunities that's going to be lost. But maybe, while I was just sitting there listening, maybe there's some kind of way, maybe to kind of get us to getting into opening a lot more black businesses, a lot. We need to be thinking about that like today.
Well, she been saying it for the longest time. Going on with this court action. So
yeah, I've been talking about it. I think more than roughly about 8 months, maybe even longer. Just talking about, well, affirmative action is getting ready to be gone. Affirmative action is getting ready to be gone, but not necessarily having the game plan in place. Like, okay, what are we going to do if they do get rid of affirmative action? And just like someone pointed out, that they're going to be coming after HBCUs next.
Oh yeah. Do you think there could be a spike in attendance at HBCUs? Admissions?
Yeah, it'll be a spike in attendance, but the thing about it is what attendance will it be? That's my biggest concern. I'm not saying that okay, I just have to have everything this way, but I want to be able to know, like, from this decision, how is it going to affect our enrollment into the HBCU space?
Right. What was the presiding who made the presiding decision? Was it like,
you mean who did the majority opinion? Who wrote their opinion?
Yeah, who wrote the opinion on it?
Let's see who dissented. So I know that the 3 justices that dissented was, I want to say, Justice Sotomayor, and then let me see who dissented. I don't know who. Was it Clarence Thomas? I hope it wasn't Justice Thomas that had the majority opinion. That would be terrible as a Black man who most certainly, regardless of whether or not he was qualified or not, he definitely benefited off of affirmative action. Let's just keep it a buck.
That man shouldn't have never been a Supreme Court justice in the first place.
I mean,
the way he did. I'm just saying, you know, growing up, Uncle said, you know, we was, you know, that was all over news back in the 90s. Like, he should have never been a Supreme Court justice from the beginning after what he did to Anita Hill.
No, he should. No, he should not. You know, just the way that he thinks, just the way he speaks, the way he held, even the way he looks. You know, you can kind of read the room with a person like that. You know, but it just goes to show you, you know, like we was, you know, conversing earlier that, you know, look at this last lady that, you know, that ended up getting in. She was 9 times qualified.
The most,
you know, she basically
the most.
She took a step down.
You could not even get any more qualified when she checked off every check mark that was possible to be checked.
All the boxes.
All the boxes were checked with her. She didn't even leave one open for them to even. There was no doubt that she is the most qualified to be on the court. I think everybody, you know, I feel like they should be invalidated though, for real. They should be invalidated.
So it was a 6-3 ruling on the case.
Oh yeah.
That's super majority.
It is a majority.
There was no doubt that was going to go that way.
Wow.
So we're gonna so Saturday night we're gonna talk a little bit. We're gonna get a little bit more about this.
We can ready to get out of here. We've been on here for almost 2 hours.
I didn't even know.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, for coming in. And then we had Mr. Leigh McKinnis on. Doc,
I just woke up.
Yeah, Doc, we'll definitely have a show on there on Saturday, especially after getting ready to be able to read. It's like 173 pages. I'm gonna drop the opinion in the chat so that everybody can take a look at it. But basically, affirmative action, as Mr. McKinnis opened up, that he let us know that this isn't just, it's not over. It's not just about affirmative action getting into school. This could have implications on funding for government programs that are set aside specifically for people based on their race. So anything that deals with race, I think like the Black farmers, they have programs that they can apply for based on their race. Even though there's empirical evidence that shows that Black people are economically disadvantaged, these types of programs can be attacked and say you have to open it up for everybody. So thank everybody for coming on. Of course, we're going to end it listening to the Sonic Boom of the South. Make sure that you guys are on Doc. Are you having a show today or tomorrow?
It'll be tonight. I have Aaron Webb from Mississippi Valley coming on tonight. Okay,
he has Aaron Webb. And then, of course, Friday, Ken Clark has a show. So make sure you're tuning in to all of the HBCU platforms, as I suspect that a lot of people will be talking about it. And thank you all for tuning in.
Make sure y'all have your opinions ready.
Right.
All right. Well, all the thing I got to say is, again, to the culture, just reach one, teach one, and let's do what we need to do. And I just hope this is a wake-up call for all of us. And thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.